Hey, thanks for joining us for PACT. I'm the PE Peter Coffin, the lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science. Here is the ACD. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast service. Also, leave us a glowing review on Audible or Apple Podcasts. Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Your monthly support gets you into the Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. We've got fantastic PACT merch available too. Finally, tell your friends. We rely so big on word of mouth. So did you know that not wanting to be fat is fatphobic?
Well, it's not, but I did hear that this week.
I'm going to just play you guys the clip.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not fatphobic. I just don't want to be fat. That's not how it works. No, seriously, I have no problem with fat people. I think they're beautiful. I'm all for body positivity or whatever. I just don't want to be fat. Actively not wanting to be fat is fatphobia. And therefore, you're fatphobic. And so what? Am I supposed to want to be fat? Literally nobody is saying that. There is little to no evidence that we have any control over our size long term, so we might as well just stop wanting size changes in general. So what am I supposed to do then? Read up on fat liberation, follow fat activists and creators, and commit to unlearning your fat phobia.
Wowee.
Has anybody tried degrowth?
Degrowth, it's very fatphobic. Very fatphobic.
The thing that strikes me the most is there's little to no evidence that we can do anything about our weight.
I think that's the most egregious part of it. Yeah.
It is. One, in that it's just not true, and that's like anybody who, which is as of 2018, 42.4% of adults in the United States. There's nothing that you can do to reduce your risk of cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, many different types of cancers. There's nothing you can do about that. You cannot affect your obesity in any way. You can't lose weight at all. You can't move classes of obesity, which do exist in terms of severity and things like that. Then when you factor in how this differentially impacts the population in the U.S., it's nearly 50% of non-Hispanic Black adults in the United States, followed by 44.8, almost 45% of Hispanic adults in the United States who are disproportionately impacted by this. Guess why that is? I'll give you a hint. It's not because they're categorically genetically different than white people, which brings us to the second and probably more egregious part of this video, and that it automatically obfuscates the environmental influences that engender patterns of obesity, health inequities across the United States. One of the strongest things being is the consistently documented relationship between, and this is even like the most middle of the road research is.
Yeah, this isn't controversial, is it?
Right. The relationship between socioeconomic status and obesity, such that if you have lower socioeconomic status, you're more likely to be obese, or you're more likely to have a higher BMI, which seems counterintuitive if you're like really, really unfamiliar with literature on health. But for a lot of you, it probably makes sense, because a lot of the factors that are implicated in obesity development are access to healthy food, the effects of marketing on healthy food and processed food since about the 1980s is when that really started to amp up and capitalize on racial and ethnic minority groups, any minority groups really, and also low-income people who cannot afford or don't have easily accessible, affordable options for healthier food.
Mm-hmm.
And that, the cost just itself, and then marketing combined with that, neighborhood walkability, safety of your physical environment, your extensive social support, stress, not being able to prioritize going to the gym or working out or just trying to put food on the table. All of these like very basic and like not really hard to think about psychosocial stressors set you more at risk for obesity. And so by saying that you have very little effect on that because, obesity is such an inherently genetically driven disease.
There's no evidence that you can do anything about it.
That means that there's no evidence that there are environmental factors that are implicated in this. And then also that there are no behavioral factors that are implicated in this, which the environmental factors make you less able to participate in. And all of this is not true. I mean, this is a perfect example of people using something that is very complicated in science, particularly health science, and essentializing people with it, and using it in the name of, diversity, equity, and inclusion when they're actually just fucking over the people they're trying to advocate for by essentializing them. Because in order for it to be real to these people, it has to be essential and something that you can't change because it exonerates you from responsibility.
I think that it does that twofold. And this is, just to be clear, not something that this guy in this video made up himself. This is an ideological thing that has been being seeded by like various NPOs and campaigns for inclusion and etc. But this ideology, it doesn't just exonerate the individual. It doesn't just tell the individual, you personally can do nothing about it. It exonerates capital.
Yeah.
This is an ideology that ultimately not just takes the blame off of capital and puts it on the individual. It takes the blame off of capital and makes it disappear entirely.
In the same way that we do with mental health, like in essentializing depression or anxiety in particular and things like that. Of course you're depressed and anxious. We live in a society where like it's almost abnormal if you aren't experiencing symptoms that appear to be like clinically relevant, because of the way that our society is built. When we think about mental health, we think about the stress diathesis model, which kind of means you can be genetically or biologically predisposed to something, but it's not deterministically bound to happen. But if you have these certain psychosocial stressors come into play that kind of activate that predisposition, then it will clinically manifest itself. But we can think of other health conditions in the same way.
Similarly, you can be trained to manage that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This person has made like 10 different versions.
Yeah, there are different
thing.
Versions of this video. I don't think we need to bother with any more of them. That's
and the way that he calls society fatphobic, it's tough for me because I understand what he's saying. He's saying that like beauty standards or whatever. But even that is changing, and that like now it's like in vogue for hegemonic powers to like be very diverse in the body sizes that they represent, that's good.
There's nothing bad about that.
That's fucking great, whatever. But our society is much less fatphobic. Again, 42% of the entire country is obese, not overweight, obese, which obese, that means that you have a chronic health condition that significantly elevates your risk for many different cancers, multiple different types of cardiovascular disease, stroke, including stroke, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, all of these things. Like obesity is like a big deal. Overweight is like kind of less of a big deal, and there might be evidence that like in older age it might actually be a little bit of a protection for you. That's kind of an oversimplification just because it's mostly relating to fall risk. That's just with overweight. That's not what we're not saying like you're a little bit chonky. We're like you're obese, you have significant elevated risk in all of these fatal health conditions. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in both men and women and all genders in the United States.
It is talked about like how much is it going to take to convince people to eat a vegetable every now and that's not really what the problem is with obesity. Yeah. And I do think we need to actually talk about what the problem is.
It's not. And this goes back up to what Peter was saying about like, it's not just exonerating the individual, it's exonerating the impact that society has on individual decision making, whether that is access mixed with socioeconomic status as a whole, mixed with built environment, mixed with psychosocial stressors that you're experiencing occupationally, socially, all of these things combined together, and then culture mixed in there too, and where priorities like fall when you are in economic precarity.
Mm-hmm. 1 in 4 Black children has food insecurity. Is 1 in 4 Black children.
I was just reading in Catherine Liu's book, 75% of Black children have experienced economic insecurity at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
That was a statistic, 3 out of 4.
And
so do you really think that like the food pyramid is like the priority of somebody in financial precarity?
Well, that's exactly it. It's talking about like you're either talking about going hungry or buying total shit to eat.
Yeah.
So that you don't go hungry, so that you at least have energy to do something the next day.
I mean, we fucking deal with that.
Yeah.
And like, we're fine.
Yeah, we're not in financial precarity, and we honestly do deal with that at times. You have to make choices based on how much money you have, what food you're eating.
And that's not to say that like behavioral modification isn't important. I mean,
of course it is.
The research that I did in undergrad was obesity disparity specific, and it was focusing on reducing obesity risk and obesity prevalence among racial and ethnic minorities, particularly among Black women and low-income people. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. There's something called social cognitive theory, Albert Bandura, and it's about kind of conceptualizing both personal factors, environmental factors, and behavioral factors, and how those all interact together to create behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're thinking about health inequities and you're thinking about these more intractable societal pieces in the environment, like lack of access, lack of walkable environment, whatever, you take those into account while establishing realistic goals that are individualized, patient-centered, culturally sensitive for this person so that they can attain healthier health outcomes. Food deserts is like the biggest one that you can think of. And oh my gosh, especially the health disparities that we see, or health inequities and obesity, based off geographical character. So like how rural you are. Rural people get totally fucked in this situation.
Well, if you're buying food at Dollar Tree, which is, just to be clear, if you're in a bad situation, that's the place to go, because all the food is a fucking dollar. But the food is also not good for you. And this is not a judgment on you. This is actually, it can save you from going hungry. But at the same time, you have to eat so much less of it because it's cheap as shit. It is not made well. If Dollar Tree or Dollar General is the place that you have nearby to get food, that's also your only choice. 7-Eleven and Dollar General is everywhere. At 7-Eleven, you can walk right into get a nice slice of pizza for $1. And it's good pizza, but it's not good for you. And that's basically what it's all about. I've had tons of money problems through the years, and during those money problems are when I gain weight. Why? Because at the end of the month there, I am really close to having $0, and I'm loading up on Dollar Tree food.
That and also stress.
Stress as well.
Financial precarity is stressful. You eat more.
Yes, absolutely.
There's plenty of research to suggest it's a factor.
But it's also really important to understand this is why they're telling you that you have no control over this stuff, because they are unwilling to consider that there is actually a power out there that is addressable in some way. This is not how it's spoken about in like the mainstream media. It is talked about like fat liberation and
I was just going to say, you know what, this has been a really great conversation, but you know what we really fell away from? How fucking stupid that kid is.
Fat liberation. Like, because, you know, if there's anything I do with my time, it's capturing and conscripting fat people into a program of slavery.
Yeah, this person is using liberatory rhetoric, probably unintentionally. I'm sure.
Oh, it's unintentionally because
I am sure this person thinks that he is an anarcho-communist and ready to fucking save the day with his 18-year-old friends.
Gonna liberate us from from our first oppressors,
from
parents,
our parents,
from our second,
teachers,
our second
and from our
oppressors,
bosses.
teachers, and then from our bosses.
I'm sorry. I'm sure this person is well intentioned in what I'm saying.
Of course they are. They just don't. They have stupid ideology.
But what that is doing, he's using liberatory rhetoric that unintentionally, most likely, obscures the role that capital plays in creating unhealthy lives for us.
But that's why capital propagates these types of things. Like, there's a reason why.
Right. This is so beneficial for, like, think of how beneficial that is for a fast food company.
Exactly.
There's nothing that you can do about this. It doesn't have to do with what I am selling to you, what I am advertising to you. It doesn't matter that unhealthy food is cheaper and that, like, you can't afford vegetables and that, like, your neighborhood environment isn't walkable. None of that matters because that doesn't fix your health anyway.
Yeah.
None of that is going to help you. So I can just kind of go on, as a human corporation, can just go on my merry way and continue advertising and selling this to you.
But here's the most interesting thing about it, in my opinion. Like, this is somebody who has been sort of ideologically poisoned by whatever echo chamber they're playing around in. It's not really his fault this ideology exists. He's certainly saying it, but there's 100 million people saying everything on social media. But this is what circulates on social media. This is what somebody says, you know what? We need to circulate this uncritically, just without context, get this moving around. And a lot of people say things like, well, that's just the algorithm. And it could very well just be the algorithm. It could be the engagement, could be all that. But it
I
could
don't
also
know. You saw how I dicked around last episode. That's not really my
Yeah.
my forte. I just kind of sat around, made jokes, and jacked off.
But it could also be any company who is aware of that content. Like, when you're on Twitter, without telling anybody, you could pick anybody's tweet and you could pay to promote it.
Yes.
You don't have to tell anybody. There's no accountability there. There's no mandatory, like, saying, like, this tweet was promoted by Burger King. Like, that's not something that happens for tweets that aren't published by Burger King. They're all completely, like, out of that. And they don't have to go on record saying any of this shit either, because they have some random that gets propped up by either the algorithm or money.
Yeah.
You can really wait for somebody to just get ideologically poisoned enough in some echo chamber to say something that's just totally insane, but beneficial to your corporation. And in theory, you could pay to have it amplified. And it's supposedly not corporations saying it. It's real life people. It's everyday people saying it, but it's not.
Right.
It makes the notion of the gifted and trusted platform a little scarier.
Final thoughts on this. It's representative of a liberal trend to take a fact or something that's found in science, and to, whether unintentionally or not, misinterpret it, such that it completely exonerates the role of not only the individual, but the capitalistic society that affects their decision making. And they do this in the name of social justice. And when they do that, that benefits capital.
In a lot of quote unquote social justice rhetoric, there's a certain impetus on the individual for a participation or sharing your story or storytelling. Yeah. And I almost wonder if they've reached the logical conclusion of that for obesity and are just realizing, like, we have to tap out. It has to be an essential thing.
With what this kid is doing, it seems like he might be operating under the assumption that he is helping with those things. But I think that's another example of the dialect, and that, like, you can call out, like, skinny white beauty standards while also not disseminating false information about people's health and what they can do, and the way that society is implemented and preventing them from doing these things to live a life that is long and healthy.
Well, ultimately, it's the same hegemony that is perpetuating these skinny centric beauty standards that is creating the conditions and perpetuating the industries that are creating the obesity epidemic.
Right.
It is not a different thing
And
creating
kind of
them.
like you said just now, those industries that seem to be at odds with each other, they actually cycle very well off of one another and promote profit.
Well, yeah, you feel guilty about not being skinny. As you feel guilty, you feel stressed, you feel compelled to eat, but you don't have any money, so you're buying shitty food, you're eating more of it.
And then you're buying shitty beauty products as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can have a critique of like conceptualizing beauty standards as something that has to be, one body type while also promoting health.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think that you can do either of those things without doing the other. It's kind of like a microcosm of like the social and economic issues.
Yeah.
These things aren't
Exact-
things that
I
are
completely agree. That's
orthogonalized. They're
wonderful.
things that work together really well. And if you're not doing one of those things, then you're probably not doing the other one right.
Good shit.
Thank you.
That's all for today. Thanks again for watching. This is Pact. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, whatever. Leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Audible. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you later.